Let us just take a breath. So thank you so much for singing that. And you did it so beautifully. And perhaps you're asking yourself why we would sing that song on a Sunday morning in spiritual community. Because the song gives us a historical context for hate, for oppression, and where hate takes us, which is violence, right? And it was written, if you don't know the history of the song, by a Jewish high school teacher named Abel. And it was written as a protest song, protesting, obviously, lynching, the lynching of black people. And then Billie Holiday, also known as Lady Day, who is one of my absolute favorites. I sing to her when I do laundry, when I cook, when I bake, when I wash dishes, when I drive to the Woodlands. She's my girl, Lady Day. And in 1939, she sang this song, and it was a song that she always sang, and it was part of just her career. And she sang it at Cafe Society in Manhattan. And she was always investigated by the FBI, and yet she felt like she had to sing the song because, again, it was a protest song and it meant something to her. So I know in church we don't talk about politics. I get that. But here is also the thing. We don't live in a vacuum, right? We don't live in a vacuum. And so we learn these teachings, these spiritual teachings of love, so that we can heal ourselves, so that we can go out into the world and be that loving and that healing presence. So the topic for today is love at its best. And I want to share Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s teachings about love. And the thing about him is he followed Jesus' teachings, our master teacher, our way shower. He followed his teachings. And remember, for Jesus, it was always about love, right? Everyone, all the time. And it was about forgiveness. Everyone, all the time. Think about when he was crucified. What did he say? They know not what they do, right? It wasn't, I'm not going to love them. It's like they just don't know. It's like Amazing Grace. They're blind. It's a blindness. And that's exactly what Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King tells us, is that racism, that hate, that oppression, it's blindness. It's blindness. So I want to share his teachings with y'all because his teachings are so powerful, and so that you know what I'm working out of. It's Strength to Love. And it has many of his sermons, which are just amazing, just so beautiful. So this morning, what I want us to ask of ourselves, and I want you to ask of yourself, is, am I willing to love? Am I willing to love? Just ask that. Is there anywhere that I need to put this idea of love at its best to? Anywhere in your life? Just ask yourself that. And then know that the practice for loving is also the practice for forgiveness. So is there anywhere in your life that you need to practice forgiveness? Ask yourself that. Any place in your life? I know I do. I'm just going to raise my hand now. Thank you. He did it before I asked him to, right? Good job. Good job. You get an A. Yeah. And so let us just think about this and ask ourselves, am I willing? Am I willing to love at its best, at its highest, the way Jesus did, and certainly the way Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King did? So there's 3 teachings that I want to share with y'all from his sermons. And the first one, he says, is that God is able. God is able. God is able. God meets us exactly where we are and gives us strength. That's one of his sermons. God is able. He has another one called, and y'all probably know this one, called Love Your Enemies. That's the second one, right? I'm going to talk about. No, I'm sorry. Love in action. Love in action. I know Reverend Vita knows that one. And love in action means that to love, we must be in the habitual habit, that's redundant, sorry, and the constant, ceaseless practice of forgiveness. And then the last one, love your enemies. It's so perfect. What he says in love your enemies is that we must practice agape love, the Greek love, the love that is loving for love's sake, the love that's about reconciliation. It's a creative love. That's what he says about agape. So let's go to the first one. Our God is able. He says at the center of our faith is the conviction that in the universe there is a God of power who is able to do exceedingly abundant things in nature and in history. So for us in Unity, this is reminiscent of our first principle, right? The first one that says God is absolutely good and everywhere present. The one that says there's only one power and one presence active in the universe and in my life, God, the good omnipotent. God is the source and creator of all. There is no enduring power. That's the first principle. So what he says about God is that God gives us interior resources. We know that, right? Those of us here who practice truth, we believe that there's not only a divine outside of us, but a divine inside of us. It's an interior resource. He says it's an interior resource and an inner equilibrium. Isn't that beautiful? An inner equilibrium. And that inner equilibrium, try to say that fast a couple of times, what it does is that it helps you face whatever it is that's hard. That's what it does. You can face whatever it is that's hard. And here's the thing we know when we have a practice. It doesn't matter it doesn't mean the outer circumstance will change, right? We can't change God or change what's happening. But what changes? Us. And then we have the inner equilibrium, the inner resource to do what is ours to do. So he tells a story in this sermon about how he had a good life, a fulfilling life. His parents took care of his needs. He went to high school. He graduated from college. He went to Morehouse, actually. He got a degree in theology, and then he gets a PhD from Boston. So he says he's had a good life. Now keep in mind, he's a black man in the South, so there's still things that he is putting up with. But he says he had a good life. And then the Montgomery bus protest came. Y'all remember that, right? He was the leader of that protest, and that protest was protesting the segregation of blacks and whites on buses. So that came, and he was the main leader. So he was getting calls, and they were angry calls, they were attacking calls and letters, and he was like, you know what, it's okay. Then he really started getting calls. They wouldn't stop. So one night he gets a call, and it says, listen, and in the N-word, which I won't say, we've taken all we want from you. Before next week, you'll be sorry you ever came to Montgomery. Just imagine at night, right? With his family in the house. So he hangs up the call. He goes to the kitchen. He heats up coffee, and he just sits with his hands in his head in his hands. And he feels like, I've come to the end. I can't do this anymore. And so I want to read to you what he says. It's so powerful. He says he had reached the saturation point. He says he spoke to God and says, I am here taking a stand for what I believe is right, but now I am afraid. The people are looking to me for leadership, and if I stand before them without strength and courage, they will falter. I am at the end of my powers. I have nothing left. I've come to the point when I can't face it alone. And he says at that very moment, he experienced the presence of the divine as he had never experienced it before. He said he heard the quiet assurance of an inner voice that said, stand up for righteousness, stand up for truth. God will be at your side forever. Stand up for righteousness, stand up for truth. God will be at your side forever. Amen. Right? Amen. That inner resource, right? that inner equilibrium. And the practice is to sit and to even just ask for it. And to believe that it's there and that it's able. And again, that the outer circumstances aren't going to change, but we have changed. We have become fortified in our faith. It's such a beautiful practice. So this next point is love in action. He says that we live according to this idea of life being getting even, right? Getting even. He says that life has this beautiful potential, but we are in this belief of that if something ugly comes towards us, that we meet it with that ugliness. And he says that we stand at this altar of revenge. And that Jesus knew that this way of being eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, wasn't going to get us anywhere. And that Jesus practiced love and only love. And so that's what he's asking us to practice. It's Jesus' higher love. It's a radical love. It's a revolutionary love, right? It's loving everyone, even if you've perceived a wrong one or wrongdoing. Think about the song. What would he say about the song? Love. That's so powerful. And when you hear that song in that context, you get it was going to be love always. It was always going to be love. And he says that forgiveness is not something we do occasionally. It's a permanent attitude. It's a habit structure of our very being. And when we live from that, the thing is when you forgive, or think about when you're not forgiving. What's happening? Like, yes, that's what I think of, exactly. You're like, right? You're just holding on, clenched teeth, you're holding on. And it's like, but you know what they did? You keep telling the story. But do you know what they did, right? At some point, hopefully you get tired of it, because I know I do, of telling the story. It's like, how many times have I told this story? Enough. So then when you let it go, you're open. You're open-minded. You're open-hearted. And so what he says to us and what he tells us is then we can live from intelligence and goodness. Because the thing is you're seeing things rightly, right? You're seeing them rightly. That is just such a beautiful practice. Something that also Charles Fillmore did every night. His 30-minute meditation was around forgiveness. And of course, yourself too, right? Because we always have to forgive ourselves first. So we forgive always. It is a habit. It is a habit structure of our being. I love that. Forgiveness is meant to become a part of the habit structure of our being. And when it is, then life is the beautiful thing that it is meant to be. So the last key point that he talks about is a call for agape love, and it's in his sermon on Love Your Enemies. And honestly, in this sermon, he's giving us a practical way to practice love and forgiveness. And what he says is that those people that we think of as enemies, they also have good in them. They also have good in them. Because the thing is we also are complicated and have all that stuff that we don't like too. And he says that we have these schizophrenic personalities. It's true, right?
Yes.
We are, he says, a civil war against ourselves. Within ourselves, there's a raging civil war. What do we see out in the nation right now? And where does that perhaps start?
In us.
With each of us, right? Yeah, with each of us. So he says, look beneath the surface, beneath the impulsive evil deed. And when we do, we will see within our enemy neighbor a measure of goodness, and know that the viciousness and evilness of his acts are not quite representative of all that he is. Instead, we will see him in a new light. What does that sound like? Forgive them. They know not what they do. Right? Doesn't it sound like that? Amazing grace. I was blind, but now I can see. It's all blindness. It's not the truth. So for King, love was not a sentimental gesture. It was an understanding love. It was a creative love. It was love for love's sake. And it was, for him, he says, agape love is the love of God operating in the heart. That's unity, right? That's our practice, is we know that the divine love is within us, and we live from that. We set aside the personality, the schizophrenic personality, and live from the truth we know. So I want to end with a handwritten letter that he penned in the mid-1960s. He said, "Love is the greatest force in the universe. It is the heartbeat of the moral cosmos. He who loves is a participant in the being of God. He who loves is a participant in the being of God." So this morning, I just remind us to be that, to be loving, to be forgiving, to be love. Are you willing? Are you willing to join me? Thank you. I love you.